Park rangers have some of the coolest jobs out there in my personal opinion. Personally, what can be cooler than working with wildlife and being out in nature every day? Well, these park rangers apparently have seen some very creepy things. Whether it be coming face to face with dangerous wildlife or coming face to face with something you never knew existed, these park rangers definitely see some creepy things. As most of you probably already know at this point, I am always looking for new stories. So if you have a story you would like to share in a future video, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that keep this channel going. Now, without further ado, let's get into these scary park ranger stories. For the purposes of the story I'm going to tell, you can call me Walt. I've been with the park rangers for about 17 years now. This story takes place about 10 years into my career. I want to stress that although this was a pretty scary experience, it has not changed my view on my job. I absolutely love my job in the outdoors. I work in a park in Kentucky. As I'm still working, I'd like to keep my job and identity safe. Mostly though, due to the strange circumstances of my story, I'd rather not have my peers grief me over this or scare anyone away from visiting our beautiful parks up here in Kentucky. Anyway, the park I speak of is a decent size and most of my job is pretty much just normal affairs. There is nothing quite like being out in nature, and there has always been a certain freedom to working in the outdoors with animals roaming. I love my job, and while the events of this story don't take place while on the job, they do take place in a park I work at. We were coming up on the weekend, and being it was gonna be a 3-day weekend for me, I was taking some extra time off to have a little mini vacation, I decided I would spend it camping in the woods around the area. A final important note before I get too much deeper into the story, I've been camping, alone, for most of my life. I know the woods and forests both from camping and from my job. Like the back of my hand, honestly. I don't spook easily and I am a very level-headed guy. Anyway, I take off Friday through Sunday, so I can come back Monday and take over for another ranger who is going to spend the next week off for a wedding. Fast forward to Friday night, I make my way pretty deep into the forest and prepare to set up my camp for the night. This isn't unusual, as knowing the area quite well, I like to keep as far from civilization as possible. The first night goes off without a hitch. I'm able to relax and slowly drift to sleep. The relaxing sounds of nature, a soothing and natural white noise machine of sorts. It was around 4:30 Saturday morning when I woke up to a strange feeling. I'm not sure how to describe this feeling, but the closest I think I can get to is to say I felt panicked. This wasn't anxiety though, as I have no history of such and it isn't something that runs in my family. No, it was a strange and overwhelming need to move from where I was at. It was almost oppressive. I got up and packed my stuff and moved deeper into the woods. The further I got away from the spot, the closer the sun came to rising, the more I felt relaxed. I spent much of Saturday relaxed and had all but forgotten that morning by the time night rolled around again. This was the night I can't explain at all. It was around 7 in the evening, and I had decided I would park it for the night and just chill till I drifted off. I listened to the sounds of nature once again. This lasted for about an hour when suddenly things fell quiet. The eerie sort. I started to get that feeling again. This time, however, I opened my eyes to see something I can't explain. They were lights. I'm not talking from a campfire or anything like that. I was far enough away from civilization, it wouldn't be a normal light source either. There's no light pollution here. These lights weren't super bright. They were actually luminescent and colorful. Many of them had red and blue hues to them. I watched the lights off in the distance for a time before they faded. One of the strangest things about this is when the strange lights faded, the sounds of nature returned, and the feeling of unease was no more. I couldn't sleep after this, so I kinda just sat up and debated heading back. The problem was, that'd take me quite a while, as I was a great deal away from where I parked before venturing into the forest. It wouldn't be safe to travel too far at night, and so I'd figured I'd just try to relax and enjoy the solidarity of the woods. It was about 11 p.m. when I got that uneasy feeling again. Nature fell silent once more, and I saw these lights appear again. This time, they were much closer, and while they still weren't super bright, I was close enough to see that they seemed to materialize out of nowhere. This threw me and made me simultaneously more uneasy and yet somewhat drawn in. What could be making these lights? They were materializing out of thin air, and they weren't coming from the moon or some other source. It seemed as though they didn't have a source, and I was quite perplexed as to their origins, honestly. After 10 to 15 minutes, the lights vanished as quickly as they had appeared, and just like that, I could hear the sounds of nature around me once again. I stayed awake for a time after that, and the last time I looked at my watch was 2 in the morning. This was also the last time I saw the lights. See, the thing is, I'd moved deeper into the forest after the second sighting and settled down again at about 1 in the morning, and an hour later I saw these lights again. Everything had fallen silent and they appeared in the distance. This was when I looked at my watch and saw that it was 2 in the morning. That was about all the time I had to do anything though, as the lights quickly made their way toward me. I freaked out and I was about to get up and run when they enveloped me. The strangest thing about it is, I don't remember anything after that. I awoke the next morning at about 9 a.m. in my truck. It is very important that you understand I don't drink, I don't do drugs, I have no mental condition to speak of. The strange events of what happened are very real, and to this day I will never forget them. I can't explain how I lost 7 hours or even more, strangely how I wound up miles away from where I had even been. I don't remember passing out, and I have no idea what happened after the light reached me. I have no explanation for the lights. I'm still perplexed to this day. If you have even the slightest idea of what I may have seen, I'm all ears. It was easily the strangest thing I've experienced in my lifetime, and I'm thankful that I'll never experience anything like it again. Hopefully. One final thing to note though, is there didn't appear to be any sort of ship or flying object to these lights, so I don't think it was a UFO in the traditional sense, which I'm guessing is likely to be what most people will think of. Also, I've been camping out in the same area since and have never seen those lights again. You can call me M. I used to work for the park rangers, and I worked in quite a few parks in Montana. They are all very beautiful and quite large. What happened to me isn't common, so please don't be deterred by my story. Montana is a beautiful state with many wonderful parks. During my time as a park ranger, I was blessed with a 20-year career full of great times and beautiful sights. All that said, the scariest moment of my career was hands down what happened to me on a day that seemed like it was going to be like any other day. I was patrolling around Glacier National Park, and things were going like any other day. Things started off nicely with some light cleanup and a fresh cup of coffee. I was feeling chipper as it was almost the weekend and I was going to be off for once. It was as I was out patrolling that things went sideways. I heard what I believed to be a mountain lion. Now, this wasn't too much of a problem except for the fact that I was in an area closer to people. There are many sites around this massive and beautiful park, and plenty of them are areas far away from the general populace. That said, it becomes a problem when some of these wild animals start trekking in areas where people frequent. Thinking I'd best check around, I began my search. We love and respect wildlife, but we also respect the safety of people in and around the parks we patrol. The best case scenario for all is to be able to avoid injury to both wildlife and people. I took pride in my job, obviously, and part of the pride came with keeping the area livable for both nature and humans. Anyway, as I continued my search, I eventually did find mountain lion tracks. It had taken a while, but it was still too close for comfort to the area. I radioed in that there was possibly a mountain lion in the area, and told them where I was at before continuing my search. I kept at my search, checking in from time to time until I was far enough away from people to feel comfortable that the mountain lion wasn't too close anymore. I hadn't found the animal yet, and the tracks had ended, as I got into a more grassy area. Cautious but still comfortable in the fact that the animal was now sufficiently away from people, I radioed in to keep an eye out, but that I believed the animal had wandered farther away. I searched for a bit longer just to be sure before I finally decided I'd searched enough. Lunchtime was approaching fast, and I felt very hungry after all my walking. I decided to turn back and head back to the station when out of nowhere I felt something hit me from behind and claw me in the back. I fell over and tried to scramble for my gun. I turned in time to get hit again and lost my weapon before jumping and running. I was going to try to radio in when I realized my radio had broken when I was knocked to the ground. It was at this point I found myself in panic, but as my senses came back to me again, I remembered that in the case of most mountain lion sightings, you should stand your ground and make yourself seem a threat. I thought to myself, how well and good that concept is, except for when one attacks you out of nowhere. I was standing now and surveying my surroundings. I could tell I was bleeding somewhat, but it seemed as though my injuries weren't deep, from what I could tell from it being on my back. Guessing I had been grazed more than anything, and the brunt of the attack had more from the surprise and also shoved to the ground, I looked around closely. The mountain lion had disappeared, but I couldn't take the feeling that I was being watched. Perhaps it was my paranoia at the time or the shock of the attack, but I couldn't get rid of the thing, or that feeling. I cautiously looked for my sidearm, but I couldn't find it. Being unable to shake the feeling of being watched, I headed as fast as I could toward the main station. At this point, I was quite a ways away, and was terrified that this thing was going to attack me again. I went as fast as I could. Move, my back still burning with pain from the initial attack. As I was starting to think maybe I'd be okay, I heard the distinct sound of a mountain lion crying out from somewhere behind me. I booked it and ran faster, now only glancing back from time to time to see if I was about to be jumped again. I could hear the mountain lion, but I couldn't see it anywhere. I continued running until I could run no longer. I took a breather and my eyes darted around the area as I scanned the area. I still hadn't shaken that feeling that I was being watched. I had to calm myself, however, as panicking was only making me more exhausted and was making it harder to breathe on top of my running all over the place. I had just about gotten my breath back when I saw the mountain lion slowly stalk out. It looked ready to pounce again, and I felt myself starting to panic. I knew I had to keep my wits about me though, and this time, being the mountain lion wasn't blindsiding me, I tried to stand my ground. I gave the deepest glare I could give and puffed myself up before letting out the loudest shout I could muster. The mountain lion seemed like it was mulling its options over, and in the longest probably few seconds that it felt like an eternity, I stared this thing down. Holding my breath and on edge, I watched as the mountain lion let out a short roar before turning and slowly stalking away. The moment the thing was out of sight, I felt myself uncontrollably shaking. I was more scared than I've ever been in my life, and I felt weak from panic. I knew I couldn't stick around, however, and so I turned and tried to go as fast as my shaking legs would take me. I eventually made it back to the station, and it was then I was treated and gave my report about what had happened. As it turned out, I was right about my wounds. They weren't life-threatening or deep. The bulk of the pain came from bruising caused both times I was hit by the mountain lion. The panic and trauma stuck with me for the longest time, and I was given a few weeks off to recollect myself. I'm still wary any time I hear a mountain lion, but the trauma has lessened a great deal over the years, and I still loved every moment of the remainder of my 20-year career with the park rangers. I shared this story partially to caution people to always be aware of their surroundings, especially when camping or while out in areas of parks you might assume are safe due to high human traffic. Nature was here first, and you should always respect that. That said, I'd also like to state, attacks like mine are not common, and my story should in no way make you avoid the beauty and majesty of the many beautiful parks around our wonderful nation. So, if you take anything from my story, it should be this. Just be aware of your surroundings and be safe, and you'll be just fine. Also, go outside every now and again and enjoy the nature. Too many people nowadays are glued to their phones and are unaware of the beautiful world around them. I'd like to start my story by saying I would not be using my real name. You can call me Tali. I've been working as a park ranger for about 10 years now. My story takes place in an area that has been featured on television quite a few times and is known for certain legends and hauntings. That place is Great Smoky Mountains National Park. One of the legends around here is about a witch called Spearfinger, who would disguise herself as an older woman and snatch up children, eventually cutting out their lives with her obsidian stone finger, hence the name Spearfinger. My story isn't about a witch though, and it isn't a legend. My story begins at the start of a shift one day in August of 2013. I was doing a trash check and general cleanup run just after clocking in. The air was cool, probably around the mid-60s, and things were fairly relaxed. I could hear the sounds of nature, and off in the distance, I could hear hikers wandering on one of our trails. It was around this time I noticed quite a bit of trash piled up on top of a small hill. I headed up and found what looked like a camp. It was clearly no longer in use, and whoever had been here had left it trashed. It was basically just an old, tattered sleeping bag and a bunch of beer bottles. It looked like it was probably either a very messy camper or a homeless person. The park is a 24/7, 365-day-a-year park, so it isn't unusual to find someone out here who may be homeless from time to time. Anyway, as I'm cleaning up, I catch something out of the corner of my eye. I look up to see a little girl. She is blonde, has blue eyes, and looks as real to me as someone might look standing next to you. Finding it odd that a little girl was out here wandering the park alone, I call out to her, asking her if she's okay. She doesn't say anything, and so I asked her if her parents are nearby. She stares at me for a moment, and then turns and walks away just out of sight. I stop everything and head toward the area I just saw her. It is when I head over there that I see her wandering near a group of trees. The girl seems to be humming and dancing in the middle of the trees. I call out to her again, and she doesn't seem responsive. Confused, I head down to her, but as I get closer, she ran and sprinted deeper into the forest. Beginning to worry, I follow her. As I reached where I believed she would be, I found nothing. I then heard humming, and looked up to see this little girl again. Strangely, she was once again on the horizon, so to speak. I didn't want to scare her, and asked her again what she was doing out here all alone. I asked her where her parents were, and she looked at me, but she never answered. I didn't approach the girl any further as I didn't want to scare her away. Instead, I tried to radio the main station. I'd found this little girl and was hoping that somebody could help me out. Strangely though, my radio wasn't working. I asked the little girl if she was alone, but she never said a word. After a minute or two, I tried to follow her again, but she ran away. I followed this little girl off and on for what seemed like hours until I saw her at the edge of a steep drop-off. I approached the girl slowly, informing her I was here to help. I asked her to come closer. She just stared at me. I was about to ask where her parents were once more when I reached her. I held my arms out and looked her in the eye before telling her, "Sweetie, I'm going to help you find your parents. It's okay." She smiled and ran toward me. I was getting ready to hug this literal girl and carry her to safety when I felt the oddest sensation. It felt like a cold chill ran straight through me. It was at this moment I realized this little girl had walked right through me. I turned around in shock and not sure what to say when I saw her smile disappear before my eyes. I want to make it very clear as a park ranger I don't do drugs. I hadn't been drinking and I wasn't sick or delirious. I had followed this little girl deep into the forest, hoping to find her parents and get her to safety, but instead I was left with the oddest experience I had ever had in my life. I didn't bother reporting the little girl, but I did search the area after she disappeared just in case. There didn't seem to be anyone missing, and there was no children missing either. I looked in multiple time frames as well, and I just couldn't find anything. It was just an odd encounter, and one I'll never truly be able to explain. I'm sure there are going to be those who doubt my story, but I know what I saw and I still remember it like it happened yesterday. Seeing what I can only guess was a ghost was odd enough, but seeing one in broad daylight, I didn't think that happened. There is a story around these parts about a man who was murdered while searching for his missing daughter, but I never saw a man, and he is said to appear to hikers as a bright light. I'm also not so sure what his daughter is supposed to look like, and I don't believe the ghost girl I saw has any relation or real connection to the legend itself. Anyway, I appreciate you sharing my story, and anyone who hears this, have you all ever had anything similar happen to you in your life? I'm a park ranger who has been with park services at Rocky Mountain National Park for most of my adult life. It was my first job and I never really looked back after that. We are open all year, and as such I work in other parks from fall through spring every year. This happened during the month of June back in the mid-90s. I haven't shared it with anyone prior to now as being a park ranger. I didn't want people to think less of me for the situation. It also, for these concerns, that I won't be sharing my name. Anyway, I went camping while off duty one late night on Wednesday. I was familiar with a lot of woods, but I wasn't completely comfortable as there were plenty of areas I'd never been on account of the fact that the park is a decent size. Like most campers, I think the idea of camping, especially alone, dictates I get out of the way and away from as many people as possible. It gives you that nice feeling of just you and nature. I knew going into this that there was a chance that it would be raining that night, so I came prepared with a tent. The night was nice and I found myself a spot out of the way of most of the everyday tourist type of campers. I packed light overall and basically had my backpack with a tent, some food, and that's all I needed for the night, as I didn't plan on spending my entire time out there. It was while I was eating dinner. I'm not sure what time it was as I didn't really pay attention to the time while camping, that I heard a strange cry coming from deeper in the woods. I was a little weirded out, but I didn't feel afraid. There were all sorts of things out here and you never knew what you might find off the beaten path, so to speak. I ignored the sound and continued eating my beans. It wasn't long before it started raining. I put out my fire and went inside my tent thinking it'd be okay and relaxing sound of the rain would be a good way to sleep. It was for a short while. This was until sometime in the night when I heard what I was certain was the sound of a bear looking around my camp. Startled awake by the sudden roar, I watched through my tent as the bear rummaged around, sniffing for food. Freaked out and not wanting to become a meal myself, I stayed as still as possible and grabbed my .44 Magnum I kept on my person and aimed it toward the bear just in case. I waited for what felt like forever for this thing to move on, but after a time, it seemed to sit still and stay in place. Thinking I'm screwed and going to have to kill this bear to get out, I readied my weapon, terrified of the possible consequences of what would happen. If I somehow didn't kill the bear after the first shot, I was readying myself to kill the bear when that loud, odd sound I heard from deeper in the forest before rang out again, but this time much closer. I watched as this bear stood up and seemed to whimper before running off in the opposite direction. I was hit with two feelings at this point. One was elation as the bear was no longer a problem, but very soon after that, I was hit with terror at the thought of that something was out there that had scared a bear away. I heard heavy footsteps, and the ground shook slightly as whatever was out there walked around. It wasn't until it turned away and walked back in the opposite direction of the forest that I got the courage to get up and see what was out there. It was then I began to shake. I saw a creature that was at least 9 to 10 feet tall walking off in the distance. Part of me thought about following this thing, but I thought better of it and decided instead to turn tail and pack my stuff up and get the heck out of Dodge. I eventually made it back to my truck and went home. Later research has me believing now that what I saw that night was a Bigfoot. At least, maybe I got a glimpse of one. I only saw it from the back and didn't dare chase it. I don't know how many things can scare off a bear. This thing seemed to do it effortlessly and immediately. I'm not saying I was ever in danger, but I don't think it would have been wise to try and follow it. If anything, I'm inclined to believe that the thing saved my life potentially. I don't know that I'd be here today if it hadn't shown up. Any number of things could have happened if that bear had attacked me. I could have missed my shot and gotten mauled to death. I could have hit the bear and still gotten mauled to death. My point is, I don't feel my likelihood of survival would have been high had that bear started rummaging in my tent. Needless to say, I'm much more careful now and tend to camp in more populated areas. I never talked to anyone at my job about my experience, as I didn't want to damage my reputation or be labeled as that crazy guy that spins tall tales at work. At any rate, I now believe in things like Bigfoot, but I don't think they mean us harm. In fact, I'm more inclined to believe they might be curious or just wish to be left alone. Regardless of what they may be or their intentions, I'm grateful to the one that showed up that night. I'm likely still here today because of it. A little background information. I'm 35 now, but at the time of my story I was 28 and I was going through a tough time in my life. I was going through a divorce and in a custody battle for my kid. I worked in Saguaro National Park, and when the following events happened, I was almost through my shift and was getting ready to head home when I heard something crying. The crying sounded like a dog, and being the animal lover I am, I didn't have it in me just to ignore the howling. The howling seemed to be coming off in the distance. Out here it gets very hot very quickly, and it is always wise to have plenty of water on hand. Seeing as the crying was coming from off the path and in a more deserted area, I grabbed my water bottle and headed off in that direction. Every time I thought I was about to find the dog, I realized the howling was coming from further away. My first thought was the dog must be moving. It didn't seem too far-fetched, but then I thought if it was moving while hurting, how fast could it really be going? Eventually, I did find the dog. At this point, I had been searching for far longer than I had intended, and while looking around, I realized I had lost my way a bit. Trying to focus on the dog for the moment, I examined it closely. It appeared dehydrated, and it didn't seem well fed. This dog looked to be domesticated, and that's when it hit me that someone must have dumped their dog out here. I was livid at the realization, and as I examined the dog more closely, I noticed it was barely breathing. I tried to give the dog some water, but it didn't seem to even consciously notice I was there. I was getting hot at this point and drank a little water myself, as I had to conserve some, since I had also drank a fair bit while searching for the dog. I decided I would see if I could do anything about getting myself and the dog back to safety. I carefully carried the dog and headed back to the direction I'd come from. I used what was left of the sun to guide myself back the way I came. I walked for what felt like hours and realized after time that I wasn't entirely sure I'd gone back the right way. Alone with a dog likely close to death and running low on water, I decided to push on anyway. My hope was that I was just tired and it was making me walk more slowly and making the trip seem longer. My hope was that I was on the right path. As I continued to carry the dog, I noticed someone had music in the distance. It sounded like drums and chanting. I can't explain why, but at the time something told me that I should head the direction of the music. The music was a bit off in the direction as I was heading, but my thought at the time was that there was music, there was likely civilization, so even if I had somehow gotten turned around, I could at least be sure I was heading towards some sort of safety. After much walking, I heard a whimper from the dog. I wanted to set the poor thing down, but I was running out of water and wasn't sure if the dog would have a chance if I didn't keep going. I ultimately decided to try to give the dog the last of my water. It didn't seem to want to drink, so I tried to spread what I could all over its fur. I was honestly running out of options at this point and wasn't sure of myself or what I should do if I was lost much longer. It was then I noticed the music had become louder. I followed this music further, and as I did, it grew louder and more forceful in its pacing. Eventually, I was sure that I'd find someone over the horizon as the music was getting very loud. I was sure at this point I wasn't just delirious, as I was hearing this music clearly as someone who might be listening to music in a car would. After what seemed an agonizingly unending amount of walking, I reached the horizon and crested over a small hill. It was then the music stopped. Before me lay a path, a familiar path. I was back where I had started, and my cart I had ridden on was right there, unattended. I don't have a music-capable radio on the thing. There was no one in sight of me. I set the dog gently in the back of the cart and drove back slowly to the station. When I got there, I explained to my boss, who had waited up because he was worried about me. He wanted to know why I was so late getting back. He said he was close to calling a search, but understood why I did what I did and was quite happy to see I was going to be okay. After asking if I needed medical attention, I explained I just needed some time to rest and some water, and I showed him the dog. We got animal services out there, and with much time, care, and attention, they were able to nurse the dog back to health. The dog is now happy, healthy husky that I named Chance. I have adopted it and it lives with me now. I'm grateful to be alive today and to have Chance. I unfortunately lost my custody battle and am now divorced. That said, that difficult circumstance aside, I'm quite happy today. I've recently begun dating someone for a little over a year now, and I hope someday to start over again. Chance is a super happy dog, and I'm grateful for every day that I get on this earth. The thing is, I wouldn't have been alive, likely, had I continued the path I was initially following. I'm not sure where the music I was hearing came from or why it stopped the moment I found my way back, but I am grateful because of this mysterious sound. I was able to find my way back. Has anyone ever had something like this happen to them? I am seriously curious, as I don't know how to explain it, and it still is a mystery to me today. Perhaps I got so delusional from the heat and just got lucky. I'm not saying that's not a possibility, but it all sounded so real to me. I have no real explanation for it to this day. Still, I'm quite sure I'm alive because of it. Thanks for listening to these scary park ranger stories. These were some doozies, and definitely had a lot of psychological twist in them. If you enjoyed these stories, please hit that like button as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Why not, right? You never want to miss a new video. I upload them almost every single day, on all things natural and supernatural. I have plenty more park ranger stories coming for you guys, and if you guys have stories you would like to share, be sure to do so by submitting them at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. You can also hear your favorite scary stories from the swamp on iTunes, Spotify, and every other podcast provider out there. Be sure to do that. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.